Hi, this is Bryan from Heirs to the Outdoors. The 2018 deer season is closed, and we're going to begin our 2019 deer season preparation today with a little reloading. In Ohio, we're limited to straight wall cartridge firearms or shotgun slugs. A couple years ago, I decided I would switch over from my shotgun to a 45-70, and as anybody knows, a 20 round box of 45-70 will run you anywhere between $35 and $40 depending on the manufacturer. Some of the Hornady stuff you can get a little cheaper. But my round of choice has been the Winchester Super X 300 grains. These boxes, depending on the time, the place, I can usually get them for, $35 to $40. I decided that after doing some math and figuring out that I could reload my spent casings for less than $1 a round, that I would go that route and get multiple uses out of each shell instead of just throwing them away. My goal here today is to show you how I go from this round here, which is a factory round, to my reloaded round, and demonstrate the process that I use for this. By no means am I an expert in reloading. It's a small hobby of mine. I do it to kind of pass the time in the winter, and I do it because it allows me to control the components and take some of the unknown factors out of the ammunition that I'm using during the hunting season. So right now, what I have here is a couple different sets of brass. I have some that I've tumbled already, but they have not been resized and the primer has not been taken out. I have a batch here that is all the proper case length, but has not been tumbled and cleaned. I have some previously that I'd done that's proper case length. It's been tumbled and cleaned. These ones over here that are upside down need to be trimmed. So today what I'm going to start with is I'm going to throw these in the tumbler and get them going so that it gets the cases clean and nice and shiny. And then once I have that going, then I'm going to work on these casings that need to be resized and deprimed. Alright, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start the tumbler going, and it's just vibrating corncob media, and that's what cleans the cases. I take a couple drops of this one-shot polish, and this is what helps just clean it up. Just a couple drops goes a long way in this. And what you'll see is it'll clump a little as it disperses throughout the corncob media, but as it goes along, there won't be any more clumps. Once I get it in there and it's looking pretty good, I just take my cases and start dropping them in. So I'll put the lid on this. I'll let this go for anywhere from, say, 2 hours to 5 hours, depending on how dirty they are, depending on if I forget about them, and what else I got going on that day. Leaving them in there a little long is not going to hurt anything. Just get them cleaner at the end. So I put the lid on and just let it go, and it can vibrate for hours. So I have a bunch of brass here lined up that has been tumbled, has not been deprimed or resized. So the first part of resizing and depriming is going to be lubing the cases. I use this Hornady one-shot case lube. You can get it at any of your outdoor stores that sells reloading materials. It's pretty good. Just give it a quick shake, and then you just spray the cases down. I usually spray them, you know, one time across the front, across the side, across the other side, and try and hit them across the back if I can. So one thing you'll realize is if you ever try and stick a case and resize it and it hasn't been properly lubed, it will get stuck. So you got to make sure you properly lube your cases, however, whatever product you use and however you decide to do it. So I take my I've got the proper size shell holder in here, and I use the priming tool so that I don't end up with all the spent primers on the floor. Because if you don't have this the priming tool in there, it'll just drop the primers anywhere. So with it in there, it kicks them out into the little plastic bucket there. So up and in. Alright, and we'll do one more. What I'm going to do is I'm going to measure the case before, and just to give you an idea of how far this is taking these out. So I got 2.097, so it's a little long. The proper size would be 2.095. So this is 2.097 starting. And after it's been resized, we're coming in at 2.105. So it's going to be long. So those will need to be trimmed after they've all been resized. And you just go to town. In and out. What we're actually doing in resizing the brass is we're moving the metal and actually lengthening the case. And so in part of lengthening the case, there's some of that other off-brand. In lengthening the case, we're going to have to trim it down again to get it down to the nominal size. Now that I've finished depriming and resizing all the brass here, and I'm getting lengths that are longer than my case trim length. So what I'm going to do is refer to my Hornady reloading manual on 4570, and it tells me that my maximum case overall length is 2.550. My maximum case length is 2.105, and my case trim length is 2.095. So what I want to do is trim my cases all to 2.095. This one is coming in at 2.103, and they're all going to be different. 2.104, 2.106. So I have a 4570 piece of brass that's deprimed. I wrote on the side of it 2.095. I keep it separate from everything else, and this is how I set up my lathe a little more efficiently than having to trim and kind of, you know, screw up a couple pieces of brass. I was able to get one to 2.095, and I always do it where it's a little tight, so when I chamfer and deburr, that takes it right down to 2.095. But it might be like 2.095 and a half. It's just going to be a little proud of that 2.095, and where I'm pushing against it. But this is what's going to help me set up my brass lathe so that when I trim them, they'll all come to the same length. So also in your reloading manual, it'll give you the different projectiles. Since I'm using Hornady bullets or slugs, 300 grain slug is part number 4500. You refer to the manual and it tells me that my case overall length at the end when the round is complete is going to be 2.550. So my goal right now is going to be to set up the brass lathe in my bench vise so that I can trim all the cases to 2.095, and then we'll begin the repriming and pouring some powder and the rest of the process to reload. Okay, so just to go over, we've got all our brass deprimed and resized. Now we're going to start the process of trimming it. I'm going to take the same shell holder, which for 4570 happens to be a Hornady number 14. I'm going to transfer it from my press over to my trimmer, and I also have loaded in here, according to 4570, the trimmer pilot number 19. So that I usually keep it preloaded in here because I do mostly 4570 on the reloading. But I'm going to slide that into there and then start locking it on. Come on there, baby. There we go. Once you get it to thread on, I like to keep the case, how it locks in, pretty vertical, and then that helps me to get everything lined up. So the way you do this is the way I do this to set it up is I'm gonna take my what I would call my standard, or my my trim length, my desired trim length. Once I have my shell holder installed in the lathe, I'm going to take my case that's been previously trimmed, and this is what I use to set up the lathe with, and I'm going to slide it in, and I'm going to slide my trimmer head down onto the brass. I'm going to tighten the collar down, the other way. Tighten the collar down, and then I want to make sure that this has a positive stop so that it's not going over the desired case length. It doesn't look like it is right now, so what I'm going to do is I'll take a case, I'm going to measure, and we've got 2.0 or 2.104. Slide it up in there, lock that down, and start trimming. Typically, a couple turns, go backwards, a couple turns, pull it out, and let's see what we got. And we have one case trimmed to 2.095. We're just slightly over 2.095, but usually that's 2.095 exactly. So with chamfering and de-burring, that'll knock that case down. So that's how quickly, using my 2.095 that now is going to be put back into its home. That's how I set up my lathe so that I can do this most efficient process and do it the quickest way possible. 2.095 exactly. Bring that up, lay it down.
Always slam that in first before you lock this down, then trim. If you don't push that in before you lock that down, you're going to come up with some short cases. And really, the reason that you want to put the trimmer pilot in before locking this down is so that you're centered on the actual lathe. Because if you lock this down before you have the pilot in there, the case head can be offset to one side or another, and you won't get a rounded, or it's complete, as close to round as possible trim on the case. So I've got all these ones are trimmed. We're going to work on the rest of these and these ones, and we'll come back to you when we're done. So now that my brass is all done being trimmed to length, so every piece of brass here that you see on the table is 2.095. Now I'm gonna get my bucket here, and we are going to empty out the my tumbler. Okay, so this is the brass that I tumbled the other day. It's pretty easy. You just take it and pour it through this sieve. So it comes out all nice and shiny. And you sift the brass out of the corncob media. And then dump them out. I have finished trimming to length all my brass. So now I have uniform brass. It's all 2.095. I have brass here that did not need to be trimmed. I have brass here that needed to be trimmed. So after you trim your brass, you need to chamfer and deburr it. So the chamfer just takes the brass shavings off the inside, and deburring knocks them off the outside. So I'll just go through, and I'm going to hit every one of these, and then once that's done, I'll run a dry patch down them, clean out the inside. Some of these I will hit the primer pocket with a primer pocket deburring tool, just to make sure that there's uniform consistency in the primer pocket. And also I'll hit every one of these with the primer pocket cleaner, just to make sure that there's not too much residue in there for the primer to sit on. So we'll come back to you after I'm done chamfering and deburring all the brass, and we'll get on to the next step in the process, which will be putting the primer in, and then putting a little bell on each piece of brass, just to open up the mouth a little so that it's easy to seat the projectile. These shells here, I'm going to make sure that the flash hole is clean and there's no burrs in there, and then I'm going to clean all the primer pockets, and then after that we're going to install primers into the shells and put a little bell on it before bullet seating. And then after that, the last step, 2 steps, will be putting powder in each cartridge, and then actually seating the bullet. So I'm going to start with cleaning the flash holes, and each flash hole, or each primer
hole in each one of these. So it's a little tool here from Lyman, and it can be a little tricky to get it into the flash hole, but once you get it in there, it's just a quick turn. There. And I could feel it grab some brass out of there. And just make sure that there's no burrs in there so that you get even ignition. You don't have any issues with your primers. Alright, last piece. Okay, so the flash hole tool is done. Just put this away real quick. And now onto the primer pocket tool. It's easy. You stick it in there, give it a twist, look at it. You can kind of hear it and feel it go. And this stuff's quick. And then after I'm done cleaning the primer pockets, I'm going to take a probably a swab and just swab the inside of each piece of brass to make sure there's no fouling in there. Anything I don't want going down the barrel of my rifles. And then get on to priming and getting the bell on there. Okay, now I've got all my primer pockets cleaned out. I did a little rearranging here. I'm just going to take a real quick swipe inside each one and clean out any debris that's left inside there before I get onto the final couple steps in reloading, which will be putting primers in and belling, then filling, and then last part, which will be seating the bullet. Okay, so got everything sorted. I've got 243 cases to reload. So what you do with this is dump your primers out, and then you can shake it and it will flip them over for you. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change out the die. I'm going to go from my depriming die to my priming and bell. This is why I like these Hornady presses, because I've installed this in here. Once I have it all set up with that locking collar that they have, I can just take the locking collar out and the whole thing is ready to go for me now. So I think it's on to the next step of the process here. So what I'm going to do is, each one's going to be a two-step process here. As it comes back, I'll load the primer in, I'll bring the case up all the way down, bring it down. So now I have my case and the primer seated, and I always check and make sure, but my primer is flush there, so that looks good. And we're on to the next one. So bell, as it comes down, put my primer in there, go forward, primer seated. Perfect. We will move on to pouring some powder and seating some rounds. So I'm going to set up for that and we'll come back to you then. I've got my powder measure full of powder. Every time
I'm reloading, I have a sticker that I'll put on the powder measure that tells me exactly what powder is in it and how many grains of powder I want to pour. If I have any questions about anything as far as reloading, I always have my reloading manual to refer to. As far as the 45-70 round, I'm using IMR 4198, and 4198, I'm going to load it to 43.6 grains, and 43.6 grains for each round. I have in the past done some chronographing and testing with different loads with my rifles. 43.6 shoots very accurately as far as a grain load, so that's what I choose to use. So the first thing I do is get my scale out, turn it on, and I'm going to make sure that it says 0. I did zero it out with the included weight to make sure that it was all calibrated. I'm going to make sure that we are in the correct, we are in grains. I'm going to put my pan on. And the pan I know weighs 85.2, 85.3 grains, and I am going to hit tare, and that will zero out the scale. So when I found that when I'm pouring powder, I want to put the pan up under there, one up, down, and that's it. So you'll see that I have my powder trickle here, and what I'll do is I will trickle it up and see where we end up. So this is 42.9. And as soon as the powder gets out here, so 43, 43.1, 43.2, 43.4, 43.5, 43.6. So there's 43.6. I'm going to take my powder right here. Tap the powder down in, move my funnel to the next one, and start all over. 43.2, so the trick to reloading this is that my powder measure doesn't measure by weight, it just measures by volume. So it's not always going to come out the same. So that's why I weigh everything on the scale and then just trickle in to get the correct measurement. So that's 43. And if I go over, I can shake a few back. 43.4. And it only takes a couple of the sticks of powder to actually kick it up a grain. 43.5. 43.6. So I'm going to continue that for each cartridge, and 200 and some cartridges later we'll be all done and ready to reload or put the projectiles on them. But actually, probably what I'm gonna do, instead of, I'm going to do about 50 at once. Get the get it to where I can manage it and do one tray at a time. So I will come back to you when I have gotten this tray all loaded with powder and ready to seat the projectiles on it. And the nice thing again about these this Hornady setup is I have everything set, and I will be able to just swap out my die here, put in my seating die, and I should be ready to go, just based off the last time that I reloaded this same caliber. So we'll see in a little while. Okay, so I have my first tray fully filled with the powder, and now what I'm going to do is change out my die so that I can go to my bullet seating die. And like I said before, since I've had this set up, it should be fully set. So we'll refer to the manual here for seating depth. But seating depth is going to be, or case overall length, 2.550. So 2.550, and I'm going to measure that after I seat my first one here. So hopefully everything should be good. Alright, so you take your case, put it in the press, put my bullet on top, and it should go right up and in. And nice little crimp on there. And I'll check my overall length here, and it comes in at 2 okay, so I could adjust it a little here. This is 2.563. Yeah, 6.3. So I need to go in a couple thou on that. So nice thing is, so I will actually have to make some adjustments on this, and then I will get back to you. I made some adjustments to my seater die. I have it all set up so that my case overall length is 2.550, and it's time to seat the bullets. So I have a 50 cartridges that I have powder in that I want to get finished tonight. Here are my slugs, and it's about as easy as this. Put your slug in, raise your ram. I'll do one check for you guys. And I'm coming in at 2.550, so that's a perfect seat on that. And just go to town, finish this box off, and I'll call it a night, and I'll get the rest of it done tomorrow. And last one. See, once you have this all set up, there's really nothing to it. You can fly through it, and that is my first set of 50 right there, all set for deer season this year. I'm going to work on the rest of these, and we'll show you a few more things in the future here. Once I have all these done, I'll set them out here so that you can see the entire finished product. But 4570 start to finish,
It's easy. Take your time, be safe, follow all the steps. It's really not a big deal. So, thank you.